A Syrian ceasefire brokered by the US and Russia came into effect on Monday evening. There have been some reports of violations, but so far the pause in fighting largely seems to be holding. The deal marks the closest cooperation so far between the US and Russia over the war in Syria. Could it also be a turning point in US strategy? Natalie Pohernen takes a look at the way the Obama administration has handled the conflict so far.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
The threshold for the red line was clear, and a year later, it was crossed. Hundreds were killed after a sarin gas attack in eastern Ghouta, a rebel-held area in Damascus.
Yesterday, the United States presented a powerful case that the Syrian government was responsible for this attack on its own people.
But the president didn't take military action. Instead, Russia stepped in and brokered a deal alongside the US to remove and destroy the Syrian regime's chemical arsenal. A year later, Obama entered the war in Syria, but not against Bashar al-Assad.
Last night, on my orders, America's armed forces began strikes against ISIL targets in Syria.
And 2 years on, as Obama's term comes to an end, the fight against Daesh is still the focus of America's Syrian policy. So has stepping back from the red line damaged Obama's credibility to deliver on those foreign policy promises? Natalie Pohernen, The Newsmakers.
Matthew Bryza joins me now here in the studio. He's a former US ambassador to Azerbaijan. And of course, you have had numerous other roles involved in the region on behalf of the United States. You've been in a critical position. Historically, you've been representing the United States in a region where the Russians are trying to relive some of the old days, reinvent themselves again, push back against what were losses in the 90s. What, in a nutshell, does Russia want in Syria?
I think two things, interrelated goals. The main thing it wants is to show that it's back, that it is a major global player, including and especially in the Middle East. And the second thing it wants to do is show that maybe the U.S. isn't, or isn't quite as an effective a player as the U.S. would like to think. Of course, keeping Bashar al-Assad in power is one of the goals as well, but from a strategic perspective, it's what I said. And keeping Assad in power is not really a strategic goal. It's part of a broader plan that President Putin has. And I think President Putin recognized that the United States fell into a trap set by Russia a few years ago when President Obama violated his own red line, right? He said the U.S. would take military action against Bashar al-Assad if chemical weapons were used. They're still being used, it looks like, by the way. I think Obama didn't want to have to use force. He was worried about the political implications. And when Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov presented Secretary of State John Kerry with this possibility of eliminating Syria's chemical weapons, the U.S. jumped on that as a way out of having to live up to President Obama's own red line. And I think President Putin saw that as weakness, as an opportunity for Russia to step in, to do what I said, to demonstrate that it's back, it's a global player. And I also think that the U.S.'s failure to act, according to President Obama's red line, led directly to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Directly to Ukraine?
Yeah,
Tell me about that. Tell me why.
I think President Putin was watching, calculating, wondering whether or not the United States is willing to impose significant costs for Russia asserting itself, as it did in Syria, in a place that's much more important to Russia, which is Ukraine. Ukraine is more than the soft underbelly of Russia. It's, in the Russian mindset, it's still Russian. It always has been. The name Ukraine means on the edge of what? Of Russia. So if Russia was able to get away with this gambit in Syria without any cost, it's able to bring its forces in, right, and operate and, frankly, contribute now to atrocities with the bombing of civilians in Aleppo. I think Putin saw, okay, lack of U.S. resolve there. Let's try it in Ukraine.
So, when we have a new US president, how's that relationship with the Russians going to change now? Because in many ways, President Obama was the not Bush president in foreign policy. So what are we going to see in terms of the US dynamic with Russia vis-a-vis Syria and everything really in the region?
Yeah. So if it's Hillary Clinton, I think we will see, we'll see what I've gotten to know working for Hillary Clinton when I was ambassador and a deputy assistant secretary of state. Someone who has a strong strategic vision, a clear strategic vision, I should say, who understands the game that President Putin is up to, and who does not want to see President Putin be able to create rifts or splits in the NATO alliance and the transatlantic community, whereby the United States and the Eastern allies of NATO want a firmer stance against Putin. Some of the other ones, the southern, southwestern NATO allies, Germans, are less comfortable with a confrontational approach. So, and that's why we see Russians coming out and President Putin making clear they prefer Donald Trump to be elected, because Donald Trump has said, well, his famous quote, wouldn't it be good to get along with Russia? He says President Vladimir Putin is somebody he believes he could do business with. I think Trump lacks a strategic vision. Donald Trump thinks that diplomacy is really kind of like one series of business-like deals linked up with another one. So I think if Trump is elected president, he will try to find common ground with Russia wherever possible. But in my life experience, every U.S. president that has come into power, maybe with the exception of Ronald Reagan, has first thought, at first, I'm going to be the great communicator with Moscow. I'm going to create the breakthrough. I'm going to be nice. Even George W. Bush, he famously thought he got a sense of President Putin's soul in their first meeting.
He looked into his eyes.
Looked into his eyes, yeah. Got a sense of his soul. And by the end of the Bush administration, of course, the relations were quite cold, which led to the non-Bush policy of the Russia reset, which was, I think, reluctantly accepted by Secretary Clinton. And now we're back to extremely chilly relations between Washington and Russia. So that will happen again if Donald Trump is elected. Just a cycle we'll go through.
Ambassador, it's been great to pick your brain. Thanks so much.